Let's dive into some other topics here. We'll start with the NFL draft. We've talked about a lot of positions: offensive line, center, wide receiver, corner, inside linebacker, you name it, we've talked about it. The one position we have not really dove into as much as I think we should be diving into, or maybe that it seems is ramping up at this time, is defensive tackle and the defensive line. Recently, the Pittsburgh Steelers brought in Braden Fisk, Mason Smith out of LSU. They've looked at Darius Leonard, I believe his name is, out of Missouri. Whoever the dude is out of, it was like Northern Iowa, whatever. The guy that I will never, ever have that name stuck in my head. Do you think we're kind of sleeping on the defensive tackle position for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Do you think it may be a little bit higher on their draft board than I think the headlines are telling us at this point in the process?
Maybe, but I think that's only because we haven't talked really at all about defensive tackle. I mean, it's been like, oh yeah, that's a need. Like they got to fill it at some point, but no one's pressed about. At least it seems like no one's pressed about saying like, oh, we've got to fill this within days 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Which I think that's pretty appropriate. Like I don't think defensive tackle, it's a need for sure, but is it as desperate as center? Is it as desperate as tackle or wide receiver?
Yeah.
I would say no. So I still don't see them picking a defensive tackle. I mean, honestly, I don't see them picking one until day 3. There's some exceptions there. Like if Braden Fisk falls a little bit, like clearly they've shown some interest in him. It might line up where you can get Mason Smith with that, second, third round pick. I think that's an option, but man, it's like, there's just way too much that they I don't know. It's just always about like ordering your priorities. And I feel more comfortable about their defensive line depth going into next year than I do about obviously their wide receiver depth, obviously center, obviously, and to a lesser extent, tackle depth as well. So like you're drafting a defensive tackle to make a long-term move, but for this season, a depth move. And basically everything we've seen from the Steelers this offseason has been about this year and about winning immediately. And a defensive tackle, be nice to have an extra body there, but it doesn't, I think, raise your ceiling or really even affect your ceiling at all to have one to get a rookie for this year. I feel like it's still a kind of, edge of their mind.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you're going to cut Larry Ogunjobi at this point because I think that we're too far gone, and that they kind of shown their hand that that's who they're going to stick with. Cam Hayward's here for another year and probably beyond this year for another year or two if that's where it's going. My thing is this: when it comes to the NFL draft this year, like you could get a guy in the 3rd round if you feel that that's the way you want to go, and that wouldn't surprise me if they used one of those 3rd round picks on a defensive tackle, even though I'm not going to predict that they're going to use one of those 3rd round picks on a defensive tackle, just because you want a center, you want an offensive tackle, you want a wide receiver, you want a corner, and then maybe with their 4th round pick they could do that, and I expect them to move, so maybe they're getting rid of that 4th round pick. I have no idea. I think it could work out in their favor where they add a bunch of positions in the top 3 rounds and kind of juice their draft stock a little bit. My bigger point is this: next year you're going to get rid of Larry Ogunjobi, and just the options are out there. Like if you're looking at guys that you're like, hey, okay, like this is who we need to get, just even if it's just for like a 1 year, gotta add him to the roster type of guy. I mean, Chase Young is going to be a free agent again, and I know people will always get on me about Chase Young, but it is what it is. DeForest Buckner is going to be a free agent again. Trey Hendrickson's going to be a free agent. Kenny Clark's going to be a free agent. DeMarcus Lawrence, if you're really going for who cares, whatever, he's out there, is going to be a free agent. You got BJ Hill, you got Josh Sweat, you got Harrison Phillips, Marcus Davenport. The list goes on and on and on. You could go and find somebody in a year to just fill the gap for a season, and then you could focus on that next year, because that's where we are. I mean, like you have one replacement in Keanu Benton, you need 2 probably. If you could just go get another veteran next year, then you could focus on finding the next Keanu Benton, and then you just move forward. I don't think you're taking a step back if that's your approach, which is why I don't think that they're going to just like target like, hey, we need a guy because of next year. It's like, yeah, cool, but you also need a center for this year, you probably need an offensive tackle for this year. You need a corner for this year. You need a wide receiver for this year. They have missing pieces right now that I think you take priority with. And then next year, because that's the thing is like if you fill all those rest of those positions and then next year you're walking in there and you need an inside linebacker and, maybe another corner and a defensive tackle, you could get all those. Right. And you can make enough moves where you don't really have to worry about it. And then your roster is still set because you did the work this year.
Right. And I think you could even like reach for a project, later in the later rounds in day 3 this year. And you could still kind of play both sides a little bit. Like you can, sort of make defensive tackle a priority by saying like, hey, look, we're building for the future here. We've got a guy that we think we can develop behind these veterans that we've got, while also kind of saying, all right, this is a low risk investment. If we've got to move on, if he doesn't work out, then we've got, next year we've got depth in front of him to kind of cover for that. And then we can figure it out later. Like you said, like they've got more options at defensive tackle than they have options at any of these other positions of need that we mentioned. So it is a need, but not as big a need as tons of other stuff that they got on their plate right now.
Here's what I want to talk about next. Size matters. We all know it, and it's important to remember it in times of need. I recently went to a small law firm in hopes of getting the compensation I felt I deserved. I didn't, and to this day, I still think about the money that I may have missed out on. I filled out mounds of paperwork, then waited around for what felt like forever, got phone call after phone call telling me what I did not do right in the process, and it was expensive. All to get underwhelming compensation and almost zero satisfaction. Fortunately, if you ever get seriously injured and want to file a claim, you don't have to go through the same hassle I did. Instead, you can make it way easier by finding out if you have a claim in just a few clicks on your phone and working with America's biggest injury law firm with the promise of being for the people. Here comes Morgan & Morgan, today's sponsor. Morgan & Morgan has over 1,000 attorneys working in all 50 states fighting to get their clients the money they deserve. In recent months, they've achieved verdicts for their clients, including one that is worth $26 million. That is 40 times the highest insurance offer. And they're absolutely free unless you win. I got lowballed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Fighting big companies takes a big firm, and with America's biggest injury law firm, you're ready to take on insurance companies of any size. Don't overthink it. You can start your claim in just a few clicks by following the link in our description or by going to www.forthepeople.com/allsteelers. It only takes a few minutes to find out if you have a case, and if you have, it might be worth millions. Yeah, if you had to pick one name that you think, and I might be putting you two on the spot here, but if you had to pick one name that you think could kind of change that course for the Steelers, that's like, oh, okay, like I could see them really liking this guy. Because I got one, I got two in mind, and we've actually mentioned both of them. That you could say,
mean like in the draft?
Yeah, like, okay, he falls to them like in, round 2 or round 3 where you're like, that would change my mind on the Steelers moving forward with a defensive tackle earlier than I expect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if Mason Smith is there, I feel like that's kind of my, like, that's the, like, I think he's projected to go later in the 3rd round, like maybe around the 80s or so. And I feel like that's Steelers at pick 84. Like I'd snag him at pick 84 if he's there. I feel like Rukaroro from Clemson, another guy, like not necessarily as big as some of those other guys. So like not, I don't know if he's like a true nose tackle, but again, like a guy that I feel like they could reach for. He's projected to go like a little bit ahead, I think, of where the Steelers are at. But if he drops, like I think he's so talented and like such a, kind of coveted guy, and those Clemson defensive linemen, like they just churn him out there. That's another guy. Like I think him and Smith, those are the guys that I consider maybe reaching a little bit higher in terms of just like where the Steelers are at with their defensive tackle needs.
Yeah, Smith was one of my names. I think that if he's there in the 3rd round and they could go after him, that's a name. Like I was told, I was joking with Nick the other day. I was given a list when I showed up at the NFL Combine, and it was like, hey, this is a list to keep an eye on. And I was like, all right, cool. And Mason Smith was on it, but it was just spelled normal Mason Smith. And I, at that point, like, I didn't know. I was just beginning my, NFL scouting, because up to that point, like, you're 100%, 100% in on the Steelers. Like, nothing else matters but the Steelers. And at that point, I was like, all right, I'm turning the page. We're looking at prospects. We're, starting to get a deeper dive, because the big names, but you don't know every name. And they wrote Mason Smith just like normal Mason, no double A. And I was trying to look him up. I was like, I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I don't think he exists. I don't think he's on there. But I know that he has some interest, or the Steelers have some interest in him. He's a name that I think if he's there in the third round, they could go after. Braden Fisk is a name that I don't think he makes it out of the second round. I don't even know if, like, at this point, people are talking about like early second round, maybe even the end of the first round. And I don't know, maybe that's where he goes. I don't know, what the latest on him is. But if he's there at the end of the second, maybe their first pick in the third, I could see them saying, hey, let's make this move. I could see them trading up to get him if they feel like, hey, that's another Nick Herbig type situation for us. That one's more my long shot. I'm not totally certain that that's going to be a thing, because I don't think it's going to work out for them. But if it does somehow, and they view this as like, oh, okay, that's our third round pick right here, then I could see him being another name. But Mason Smith's definitely a name to watch. That dude's got versatility. He's big. He could play all three positions across the defensive line. I think that that's a name, if he's there in the third round, that could push the edge for the Steelers, and as a name that, like, immediately comes in here, you have high hopes for a third round pick. So
right.
I think that's a name to watch.